You found it. Your home for the best content on your favorite team, the Fighting Tigers of LSU. Do us a favor. Subscribe to the channel. Leave your comments below. Be sure to smash that like button. Brian Kelly, the new LSU head coach, leaves Notre Dame after 12 seasons, leaves as the winningest coach in Notre Dame football history. That in and of itself is a mouthful. Pete Sampson, who covers Notre Dame for The Athletic, is good enough to join us for a couple of minutes here. Pete, thanks for taking some time on a busy day. How are you?
I'm good. It's been a wild. Has it been 48 hours, 72 hours? I've sort of lost track of it all.
Well, ours has been going on for about 8 weeks, so you're just getting started, brother.
Good point.
And I wish you luck with all of it. Let me just start with an obvious one, and that's what's the reaction in South Bend like right now?
Shock would be shock and confusion to start. Almost like bordering on disbelief. Based on all of Brian Kelly's commentary about, I'm not leaving for another college job. I want to retire here. I'm not leaving Notre Dame under my own volition, the fairy godmother thing, all of that. And then I think once you get into his kind of abrupt, come up here, I'm out of here, talk to the team yesterday, then it gets a little more defiant, a little more angry. So I think now there's more of a, we're going to show you we can win without you vibe around here. I don't know how that will translate into the next staff. I don't know how it will translate into next week. But that would be sort of the attitude around this place today.
I could certainly understand why it feels like it was abrupt. Jack Swarbrick did say yesterday, kind of had a feeling for maybe a month or so that something was up. I
skeptical of that. I'm very skeptical of that commentary.
Okay, why?
Because I just understanding and reporting out the story that we had on The Athletic today about how Notre Dame was sort of caught off guard on this. It's one thing to say like, maybe he wants to look around. And I know Notre Dame was under pressure from Brian Kelly to meet, to talk about facilities, to talk about compensation, and Notre Dame didn't really press the issue. It was more like, we could talk after the season. But the fact that, is it a shock that he left? Probably not. Is it a shock that he left on Monday after Notre Dame finished out the season 11-1? That's the shock. The timing of it is a shock. Maybe we're splitting hairs here. The fact that he left doesn't blow you away. The fact that he left when he did as quickly as he did, that I think is probably more the surprise.
And let's dig a little deeper there, because the most surprising thing, Pete, is you're one upset away. I mean, Notre Dame is one upset away on Saturday from being in the playoff. And I believe that's going to happen, by the way. I do think Notre Dame is going to end up in that Final Four. So 2 parts. Number one, I mean, if you would elaborate there on how that might have altered or not altered this, or what the feeling is there generally, and then also what do you do? Like, what does Notre Dame do if they make a playoff? Who coaches the team?
Yeah, I mean, that's the question without a firm answer right now. I think ultimately it would be Marcus Freeman, their defensive coordinator, who's, Brian Kelly would like to come to Baton Rouge and be his defensive coordinator there. But I think that will probably be what happens, especially if Notre Dame makes the playoff. If Notre Dame misses the playoff, then, I feel like everyone's a little bit more of a free agent, unless Notre Dame locks down its new head coach internally today or tomorrow or Friday before the weekend comes. So that's an open question right now. But I think Freeman would probably be the guy that would be acting as head coach at that point.
Is Freeman a candidate to be the Notre Dame head coach?
Yes, 100%. He is under heavy consideration. To me, he's the only internal candidate with like serious consideration to get the job. So that's ongoing. He met with Notre Dame's athletic director, Jack Swarbrick, on Wednesday. What came out of that meeting is kind of what I'm working on right now to figure out. But he's the guy that, while he's a risk, everyone is a risk. He is available. He is here. He is very popular with the roster. Brian Kelly publicly and privately has raved about him as a difference maker, both as a coach and certainly as a recruiter. So he's somebody that I think Notre Dame, if they can get over the fact that he has no head coaching experience, he checks a ton of other boxes that you would want in a head coach.
Is that something that's plausible, Pete, where they could get over the fact that he has no head coaching experience?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, they could. I think they're working to get over that right now. We'll see if they get there, but the idea of, what the culture that Brian Kelly helped create up here, 10 plus win season, 5 straight years, like, you don't want to tear that down and rebuild necessarily. It's not like LSU where you're starting over because it's the best thing to do. That's how it was when Brian Kelly got the job here. You tear it down to build it back up. Notre Dame, I don't think, wants to voluntarily tear itself down to build itself up when they're sitting there at 11-1 after they went 10-2, after they went 11-2, after they went 12-1.
Being sensitive to, obviously, there's a very different reality and series of questions facing Notre Dame right now in South Bend, but a lot of those questions are the same questions that will answer questions here, like staff. Marcus Freeman's a guy that LSU wanted to hire a year ago. He picked Notre Dame over LSU. What about Tommy Rees and other staff members? Is there a feeling there about what guys might join Brian Kelly in Baton Rouge?
Yeah, it's certainly up in the air right now. If Marcus Freeman is the new head coach at Notre Dame, I think Tommy Rees will continue to be the offensive coordinator at Notre Dame. I'm confident in saying that. I don't think you'll see those guys split up if Freeman is named the head coach. Beyond that, the guys that I think would be most likely to join Brian Kelly in Baton Rouge, Mike Elston, the defensive line coach, who has been here for all 12 years of Brian Kelly's run. I think he's reluctant to pack up his family and move. It's rare that you put roots down in coaching, but he's been able to do that here. But he's been a very trusted advisor for Kelly for a very long time. Jeff Quinn, the offensive line coach, will be interesting. I don't think there will be an appetite for Kelly to bring him down there, but it's possible. And then one that Notre Dame has already retained was Matt Balis, their strength coach. He has been, I think, one of the great architects of Notre Dame's turnaround after the 2016 disaster. The players up here were adamant that Notre Dame do whatever they could to keep him. Ultimately, they did. So that's a key one that Brian Kelly would have liked to have brought down that he won't.
Okay. That's very interesting because that was one that was a hot topic of conversation here. Is Tommy Moffitt's been a strength and conditioning coordinator at LSU for 20-some-odd years, and his future and his staff was very much up in the air. Pete Sampson's with us, covers Notre Dame for The Athletic. Good enough to give us a couple minutes here. A few more. Brian Kelly was asked today about the recruiting class that he had put together at Notre Dame and if he planned to recruit any of those players. He said, we're going to focus on, home base, basically Louisiana. Is there any legitimate concern about Notre Dame's current roster and its current commits, those players flipping to LSU?
They have a commitment from Amorian Walker from down there. That would be one that would be interesting to me. He's sort of been waffling between Notre Dame and Michigan for quite a while. LSU has offered him, but they offered him as a DB, and he wants to play receiver, which Notre Dame likes him as a receiver. That would be one. Logan Diggs is a bit of a revelation running back in the freshman class. He was, 3-star prospect. Like, they thought he was good, but he's been great. That is one to watch. I also think he would be the starting running back at Notre Dame next year. So, does it make sense to stick around where you're already the starter opposed to going home? I don't know. But in terms of the other commitments in the class, I don't see it. Devin Moore was a 4-star safety from Florida and Naples who already decommitted. That's one that LSU will be is already in on. But if you follow recruiting, there's not a lot of crossover between Notre Dame and LSU. That's not a head-to-head battle you see a whole lot.
Sure.
So I wouldn't expect I would expect this to sort of be an Oklahoma USC situation where you're seeing a bunch of guys flip over to the other side of the line.
That makes sense. I'm assuming this is a hot topic conversation there, and I'm curious with your thoughts on this. Connect the dots. Is Luke Fickell to Notre Dame a real possibility, which could then in turn mean Marcus Freeman ends up at Cincinnati?
Yes. Yeah, that is a real possibility. Luke Fickell is very well regarded around Notre Dame, I think, for good reason. The timing of that, a week ago, I would have said, a coach would never leave his program when he's in contention for the college football playoff. But
right.
that, the world has changed a little bit. But I have heard, talking to sources in the industry, that Luke Fickell is adamant that he will not leave Cincinnati as long as they're in contention for the playoffs. So the timing of that probably works against him with Notre Dame. It's a job that Fickell would want, but I also don't think he feels like he's in a position where he has to take it. Yeah, he's been there for 4 years now, has a son on the roster, but I think he is very well regarded by Notre Dame.
Fascinating times. Rare, if not altogether unique and unprecedented. But here we are. Pete Sampson, who covers Notre Dame for The Athletic, good enough to spend a couple of minutes with us today. At some point, I'll probably bother you again, but I do appreciate a couple of minutes today.
It's anytime. It'll be fascinating to see sort of how a guy that I covered for all 12 years, and I sat in hours and hours of press conferences, reacclimates to a new climate, a new culture down in Baton Rouge. I'm gonna be fascinated to watch it.
It's funny you mentioned climate. His family were all wearing T-shirts today, and you're talking to someone who did live in South Bend for a year. I'd guarantee you that they would not be wearing T-shirts if they were in South Bend today.
No, absolutely not.
Pete Sampson, thanks for a couple of minutes. We appreciate it.
All right, anytime. Thanks.
Be well. Good perspective there. They were blindsided, but I'm going to tell you, I want to remind you something, okay? And I've told you this for, I don't know, maybe 4 to 6 weeks. It all jumbles together now. When I told you that Brian Kelly vetted this job about a month ago, he was making calls here. And unsolicited, Jamie Howard yesterday told you the same thing. Jamie and Walker Howard went up to Notre Dame for the USC game on a visit, and Jamie disclosed this on the show yesterday. He said that he asked Brian Kelly about the LSU job, and Brian Kelly told him point blank, yeah, they called, not really interested. So that goes to tell you that there was, I mean, that was a month, that was late October. It was a month ago, 4 or 5 weeks ago, that Brian Kelly had already been contacted by LSU. So this was not a new thing. My only question at this point is, was Kelly the guy all along, or was it a no initially, and when the Riley thing went down, did they then very quickly go back to Kelly and say, here's the offer, take it or leave it? I don't know. And that we may never find out, or we'll find out in time, or however it goes. So, hey, thanks so much for watching. Please leave your comments. I love to interact, and be sure to hit the red subscribe button below.